I did my first fan art ever featuring my favorite anime/manga ever, Berserk. A touching story all about how you should chase your dreams even when your friends don't support you. I'm Abbey with photomanipulation.com, and I just made everyone who has ever read or watched Berserk incredibly angry. I want to jump right into it today, so real quick, let me show you Photo Manipulation's very own Halloween resource pack. Halloween might be over, but I'm spooky all year round, and now you can be too. Nightmare Before Christmas? Anyone? Like, come on. You know how they had all those little doors with the other holidays? I always wanted them to go into those doors, and now I can using this pack. Grab the pack and much more using the link down in the description. Okay, so starting with creating an eclipse background from scratch, which I always thoroughly enjoy doing. And I promise any eclipse you make by hand will be better than 90% of the pre-made eclipse stock photos you are going to find. Unless I release my own pack, of course. They just tend to be super flat and simple, and photos of actual eclipse aren't going to give you that nice cinematic punch, assuming you want it in the background, but very close, like we have here at least. My main tips are: first, start with simple shapes, and then super slowly keep adding in light and variation in shape. Keep the brushes flow low, that always rhymes. I'm talking about 20% tops and as low as 1%, especially to all you mouse users out there. You can absolutely recreate the same eclipse using a mouse, just keep your flow rate low. And try out different layer modes. Don't rely on overlay and soft light, especially overlay. It's super overused, and that's how you get that overly processed Photoshop look. As second, no sharp or straight edges. Well, it's a circle, so I guess nothing is straight, but you know what I mean. I have become incredibly fond of the smudge tool in the last year or two. It's how I get smooth but not necessarily feathered edges, and how I got the slight wavy shape to the border of the eclipse. And third, grab some references from paintings, movies. I relied heavily on the music video for the song Black Star by David Bowie for this one in particular, and just figure out what you like. For instance, I'm not too fond of uniform lighting. I like when one side has less and more concentrated light, while the other has more substantial lighting and more light bloom. I feel it gives a better sense of movement, like it's passing by the sun and just about to complete its perfect circle shape. That's all personal preference though. If you want uniform lighting, that's great. Just try and make all your shapes organic and kind of imperfect. For extracting the subject, I just masked using a brush. I'm really starting to prefer the edge that gives me in particular. And even if I do use the pen tool or whatever, I always go in and clean up with a brush anyway. As always, once I extract the body, I convert it into a smart object and quickly select the hair, add a new layer mask, refine the hair using select and mask, and finally do some hair refining by hand. This time around, I did do something that I'm kind of starting to do much more often, which is use decontaminate colors found in Select and Mask. Normally, it's very hit and miss, and when it does work, it never works 100%. There's always some kind of weirdness to it, and worst of all, it's destructive. It permanently affects your image in a pretty significant way, in fact. So what I like to do is crank it up to 100, making sure it's set to export as new layer and mask. That's the most important part. And then delete the layer mask. Clip it into the original layer and layer mask, then add a new layer mask onto the decontaminate color layer, and hand mask in the areas that do work. This gives you control and is a great way to knock out the fringe colors on the hair. It's kind of a mouthful to say, but it's pretty simple to do. I also cover it much more thoroughly in my upcoming course, which I'm going to name drop a few times, even though it's not out. Unless it is, in which case I'll put the link down in the description. But if you're watching this new, it's definitely not out yet. Now some rim lighting. I wanted some pretty harsh rim lighting, but I didn't want it to look like typical overly perfect rim lighting you tend to see in a lot of composite work. I wanted it to be appropriately almost anime inspired, still very stylistic but in a different way. It turned out fine. The lighting in general still needs a lot of work, but it's fine. I won't spend the whole time nitpicking what I wish I could do. So I didn't do my typical process of color grading at the beginning. Usually I have a big fat group of 5 to 25 different adjustment layers at the top of my layer stack. I ended up with like 2 and just spot corrected the rest. Most of the color is being set by the light coming off of the eclipse, and I ended up liking the soft brownish tones and didn't want to mess with them too much. Even without the stack, this ended up being a 4 gig file, because I insist on using everything full res and being as non-destructive as possible, even though I did rasterize a lot of my smart objects in order to hopefully streamline things. Still, like a 4 gig file. I did try to be a little looser with this image, but I've always had a rule in my head where the image needs to look just as good at 100% zoom as it does at 25% zoom. And in a world that only cares about thumbnails, this is not a good compulsion to have, to be honest. Like, honestly, I don't mind it. I like that I do it. I just don't suggest that you do it. And now some blood, and then later some more blood, and a bit more blood even after that. A lot of blood painting here. I have a whole section on blood in my upcoming Dark Surrealism Masterclass course, blah blah blah, but this method here is a bit different than usual. I just tried a few things out, messing with layer modes more than I normally do, and I wish I had time to redo the face. That was the first time I was trying out this technique, so it was a bit rough. But later on, I placed some blood on the arms and hands, and it worked out much, much better. Overall, it's still fine. My blood used to look like strawberry jelly. Like, 1-for-1 strawberry jelly. Just everyone's bleeding strawberry jelly. You know, so while creating this, I did get to thinking, because I was all excited about doing a Berserk fan art, because it's one of my favorite fictional things that exist, but I wouldn't want to exist in its universe. That would be a pretty bad time. I'd give the Tolkien universe a shot, and I'd definitely live in Studio Ghibli land. Like, have you seen their bacon? I don't even eat meat, and I'd eat their bacon. I want to know if you've thought about which fictional universe you would live in, not based on characters or the specific movies, but the overall world building. Harry Potter, Zelda, Star Wars, or Berserk if you're brave. Let me know in the comments because I think the answers given can potentially say a lot about a person. I'm very interested. Here I start playing with adding in the nightmarescape triggered by the eclipse in the story. Unfortunately, I had zero time to build or paint what I wanted, and it has such an iconic look and feel that there was no way I was going to just find something that worked. I ended up using a lava rock landscape, which kind of gave off the same vibe-ish, and just ended up obscuring the crap out of it. I wanted to make sure it didn't look like lava. That was a big thing. Just an implication of a secondary environment that may not be so nice. To be honest, I prefer the image without it, but it was just a timing thing. There's so much I'd love to redo or spend more time on, and I probably will one of these days, if not just remake it in a more leisurely pace, where I can make something really big and impressive. Example 2 of Abbey running out of time is the behelit, or egg. I'm just gonna say egg. I created one before for a super old Berserk fan art I did years ago and never finished. And for this, I wanted to paint way more of it. I had a very specific look in my head. It's like I have the skills, just don't have the time. So I was like, crap, I gotta just do what I did before because of lack of time. Then I was like, screw it, and I just ended up jamming the old face onto the new egg. I ended up being able to make it work in the end. I don't hate it. It definitely looks better than the old one I did way back when, but I want to redo it. I'm gonna put up a reference for some of the stuff as I go, especially the egg, because this egg, it's a hard thing to recreate in real life without it looking hilarious. I was just sitting there literally laughing and being like, I can't do this to my boy. and we have more blood. I wanted the image to have even more blood, like zero skin, just a sheen of velvety blood dripping over everything. Think carry times 10. The streams worked out fine though. Here, I start to realize that even if I get the egg to work, it's so tiny that I definitely need to start pulling focus to it, and my lighting was already pretty all over the place, so why not just commit to the highlights and the excessive rim lighting, which kind of ends up saving it in the end. Pretty much the last round of blood here. You notice I pick and prod at things kind of as I go. That's why I'm always saying art isn't a linear process. I don't do things in a step 1, 2, 3 format. I just kind of turn it into that for tutorial's sake after the fact. I tend to move from area to area to keep myself from becoming bored or frustrated, or if I'm thinking about how I'm going to do one thing, I'll work on another bit, or I'll finish another bit to give me momentum to start or to finish a different bit that I may have already started and, like I said, got frustrated with. Jump around and refine as you go. Start rough and then refine later. More smudge tooling to try and knock out some of the sharpness from both the subject's edges and its rim light. Again, this is a great way to smooth things without making them look blurry or feathered. I like to paint shadows using color fill layers set to multiply with an inverted layer mask. I feel like it helps keeps the shadows from becoming patchy, and then I can easily change the color by just changing the color fill. Usually I add a bit of blend if to it as well to knock out the highest of highlights, which can help things look a little bit more structured and less blotchy. Big mistake is using a overly soft brush for everything. That's how you get kind of blobby messes with no real structure. And like I said, I think leaning into the harsh rim lighting is what made the egg end up working. I like them at least. I like to keep about a 60 to 40% ratio of stylistic choices to photorealism. but they still need to mesh well. So if you remove the dramatic lighting from the subject, the egg would look super out of place. You'd have something completely photorealistic interacting with something hyper stylized. It's not gonna gel. The hand could still use a lot of work, in fact. Something being stylized isn't an excuse for it looking bad or incorrect. Hard pill to swallow, but sometimes intent doesn't cover up bad choices. And finally, I've been finishing off all my images by turning them into smart objects, one big smart object, and then doing my final processing in Optics by Boris FX. This was meant to be a walkthrough of my finishing steps, in fact. I do my last lighting, add noise, sharpen, and do a bunch of other stuff to give it that final finishing sheen to make it social media ready. But then I kinda wanted this to just celebrate Berserk and its creator, who sadly passed, and it is one of my favorite things, and my first proper fan art. I'm very excited about it. So my next video will definitely be that, a complete and proper step-by-step how-to of my fine art finishing touches. In the meantime, you can grab Boris FX for yourself, use code Abbey25 to get 25% off your purchase, a link down in the description, and you can learn all about optics in my Optics by Boris FX video. I focus primarily on the lighting effects because I think that is where it that's where it shines, but there's tons more to it. It's basically like having a secondary Photoshop inside of Photoshop. But for now, I'm Abbey Esparza with photomanipulation.com. See you next time.